Hello Internet, welcome to the channel. My name is Frankie, and in today's video we are going to be building a walkthrough exhibit. I'm going to show you how I do it, and we're going to be building for the monarch butterfly. This is of course the only butterfly in game that is indigenous to Australia, and all the animals in this zoo are little franchise mode to the Outback track are Australian, so we need to keep the butterflies Australian as well. So let's dive into it, and we're going to start by building a basic structure, kind of a footprint for this area. And I also want to have kind of a picnic area out the front as well, where we can have a few more shops dotted about, because so far we really haven't focused on that as much as we probably should have, and our guests are starting to get a bit thirsty and hungry, so we're going to make sure we've got some shops as well. The three shops that I'm going to be going for are Gulpy Slush for a nice icy treat to cool down our guests, and then we're also going to have Cosmic Cow Ice Cream because that's even better for hot weather. And lastly we're going to go for Mexilente, I believe it's called Mexilente, which is a Mexican styled place because yeah, I didn't really know what to do for the savoury food, so I kind of went with one that is from a hot climate instead. The main building pieces we're going to be using for this structure are going to be the Australian wood panels, because we have used those already throughout our zoo, and it really helps to lean in on a theme like that. It ties it into the rest of the zoo and what we've already done. For the roof I'm going to use some of the flat corrugated iron pieces that is also from the Australian pack, as just like before it has been used on a bunch of other buildings in the zoo and it helps to further that theming. But I also just like how this building piece looks, to be honest. I think it does give a really nice windswept, sunburnt kind of feel to the buildings, and that's exactly what I'm going for here. We want a very arid looking zoo. It's out in the desert or the grasslands of Australia, under the scorching sun in the sweltering heat, so it is going to be covered in dust and it is going to look a bit mucky. So that's the idea behind using these kind of worn down materials for our buildings. But of course this is also a zoo where people are making a conscious effort to make it look nice, so we're going to use some of the Australian decorative poles, and we're going to use those as support structures for the roof, because at the moment it's just dangling over the top of the shops, and if you were to go there to buy yourself a little ice cream you might get crushed to death, and that is not good for our guests. We have to take health and safety very seriously here. We don't want our guests dying. That is going to get us a poor rating on TripAdvisor or whatever they use in Australia for that kind of thing. I'm not sure. I'm rambling. Now we're going to put in a exhibit box, because whilst we're having a walkthrough exhibit, I think it'd be quite nice to have a look at one of the more ordinary, I guess, exhibit boxes on your way in. And we are going to be putting the blue-tongued lizard, I believe it's called in this game, but I'm fairly sure it's the blue-tongued skink, if I'm not mistaken. We're going to pop that in, and we're going to use these same wall pieces that we've used in front of the shops, those fascias, because I really like the cutout hole. I think having the whole side of the exhibit visible is just a bit too much, because that is not how you see it in zoos. Normally there's a little section that you can see into, and it just makes you feel more like you're stepping into their world, and that's exactly what I want to go for. So we're going to have a more reserved viewing area for this exhibit box, and yeah, that is just my general rule of thumb when I'm making exhibits, to make the window that you can see into just a little bit smaller. The pathing out the front of the shops at the moment is not our final version, it was just kind of to mark out where it was. But this chalky kind of dusty path, I don't know why I said chalky, it's not chalky at all. This dusty path we're using here is what we're going to use to make a kind of plaza-y area where we can then put a bunch of picnic benches, and it allows space for our guests to sit and eat out front of these shops before going in to explore the butterfly house or the rest of the zoo. Now it's time to move on to the actual butterfly house, and I did have a few different ideas for this, but when it actually came down to building, they just didn't work. I just didn't think they looked very nice. So what I did was I discovered what this building was meant to look like through just experimenting. So what I've done is I've used a bunch of the square wall pieces, just laying them out randomly, and then I decided to have this far edge be sloped. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us a nice glass slope running up the side of the building and then over the top to be in line with the roof. And this is going to allow us to have a greenhouse kind of looking building by making it all glass, but also having that slope, it just looks, quite frankly, it just looks really nice. It allows us to go further into the building because it makes it a bit larger, and if I want to place a habitat outside this structure, we can then use the butterfly house partly as a viewing gallery, and it will feel really immersive as well because it will feel like you've kind of stepped into the habitat. So I am really fond of this idea of using this glass structure at an angle. Yeah, I'm actually just really happy with how this came out. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the modern glass pieces to create our greenhouse area. And we're also going to use a couple more wooden pieces down the bottom to kind of create somewhere that the glass would be sitting into so that it doesn't disappear into the ground, but instead is secured in a more foundation based structure. And then up the top we're going to use a couple metal beams, also from the Australian pack, just to make it look like where the glass would bend, as in the corners meet, there is somewhere for those pieces of glass to be fixed to, because otherwise it just looks a bit odd, like how are they connected? So adding those metal poles really help with the believability of this structure. Once we've selected the walkthrough exhibit and got rid of all the walls, making sure that they are transparent and therefore we can build our own borders, we also have to get rid of the PVC doors because they're just kind of hanging about for no reason. But we do of course need them. So I'm going to place one near the entrance of the building, controlling where I want the guests to be coming through, rather than them just being randomly in the middle of the building, because that doesn't make any sense. I then added a nice wooden archway to this part of the building, and fortunately these PVC doors are thinner than your average 4x4 building piece, which means you can hide the frame entirely within another wall. So that is exactly what I did, and what we're left with is the nice PVC strips being seen dangling down from the archway. It was then time to replace the pathing out the front of the shops, and I decided to use the Oceania woven bark wall floor pieces. Honestly, these names are so long, just because I thought it would be useful to tie into the Oceania area that we've just left, and also I think it looks quite nice up against the Australian building pieces. In my head, the temperature adjustment for these walkthrough exhibits wouldn't work the same way as they would with normal exhibits, simply because they're out in the open and therefore the air is much more difficult to control. So in order to remedy that, I added the cooling fans to the wall of this butterfly house. I did later discover that this is completely unnecessary and that you can just adjust the temperature within the walkthrough exhibit itself. The science behind that? No idea. However, I do quite like how these little wall fans look, and I'm going to keep them anyway just for that little kind of hint of realism, just because we are in a greenhouse structure in the middle of Australia. You are going to bake alive in here, so we need some air conditioning. For the path inside of the butterfly house, I decided to use the Oceania driftwood flooring pieces. We also used those in the Oceania area. I just think they look really nice and thematic. They look like they're nice and dry, which is exactly what we're going for with this zoo, and they just lend themselves to this kind of build. The main idea behind this butterfly house is that it's going to be packed with foliage. It's going to be lovely and tropical in here, so these pathing pieces are really going to help you stay on the path, because we don't want anybody wandering off into the bushes and fighting some butterflies. Can you imagine what a fight with butterflies would be like? They're going to end up being hundreds in here. You would be swarmed. You would lose, and I don't want any of my guests being eaten by butterflies. It's such a painful way to go. Imagine all the tiny bites. What am I talking about? Okay, let's move on. Over at the window to look into our blue-tongued skinked exhibit, I did kind of feel like it was a bit too plain. Whilst I love these smaller windows to look in, you do kind of need to decorate them because there's just a bit of a strange hole in the wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some Australian decorative poles, and I'm just going to make kind of a border to the window. It's going to be quite thematic and just a bit more immersive in general. It's a nice little finishing touch to this exhibit, and with that in mind, the exhibit for the blue-tinged skunk, no, definitely not, the blue-tongued skink is finished. So we can move on to some more stuff. On the large outside wall, we do need a little bit of decoration. So at the bottom of it, we're going to create a bit of a border using some of the Australian logs. I'm going to use the 1 meter ones and just line the edge of this wall with them. And then I'm going to select some at random and adjust the height of them to make it look a little bit more varied, because it's always more interesting to have a bit of variety in heights and stuff when you're doing things like this. On the wall itself, we're going to place some of the Australian themed blueprints that came with the pack, and we're going to be using the giant lizard just because it looks awesome. We're going to pop 2 of those on the wall, and I think it's kind of fitting because this is obviously an exhibit. We have the butterflies, of course, but we do have a tiny little lizard, so we're going to use those on the wall just for a bit of decoration. On the walls to where you would enter the actual butterfly house itself, it is a little bit plain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of these large wooden leaves. I'm going to recolor them to be something that I'm a bit happy with personally, and I'm going to place them on the wall in a bit of a random kind of pattern from the bottom portion. So it looks like you're kind of looking through bushes in amongst a lovely jungle area or something, and I'm going to make sure they're at different angles and whatnot, and then I'm going to come back and get a slightly darker version of it. I'm going to take each color that I've used for this leaf and darken them. Then these leaves are going to be pushed ever so slightly behind the ones we've already put on the wall. This is going to add a bit of depth to the kind of mural we're creating. By having darker leaves in the background, it does suggest that they are further away, and therefore adding an extra dimension to this piece. We're then going to go grab one of the education signs that we used in the previous video that I downloaded from the workshop. Beautiful creations. If you're on a console, I would definitely look for these. We're going to delete the specific animal that it is for, which is of course in this case the water monitor. I believe it's the water monitor, could be one of the other monitors. And then we're going to replace it with a few of the butterflies instead. And this is really going to help with decorating this area, because at the moment, well, when I started, way too plain, but this just adds a little bit of life to it. We're also going to add a couple of the conservation boards to this area, and we're going to have it focus on the bee crisis and the amphibian crisis as well, as I think they're kind of appropriate for the exhibit house. Then after that, there's not much left to do, so what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the planting inside the butterfly house, which is easily the best bit of the video, mainly because I stop talking and you get to relax. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave something in the comments down below. Until next time, I'll see you later.
as I shut, as long as